Class is in session. I'm Anthony.
I'm David.
I'm Kirby.
I'm Katie.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Ara.
On this week's show, a very special episode as we have a creator interview segment. So we have some guests that you heard in the lineup there. We're going to be talking about three comic books that were created amongst the two of them there. Let's dive into the creator interview. All right, as I mentioned, we have two very special guests here. One of them you know very well. Welcome back to the show, the owner of Crimson Cowl Media, David Gloyd, or as he's known by his superhero name, Mr. Gloyd. How's it going, David?
It's going well, thank you. Good to be
And
back.
a brand new special guest, but a friend to us here at the show. We have Arrah Markohn. How's it going, Arrah?
It's going well.
Awesome. So, what we're going to do here is talk about a very special comic book that came from David and Ara and the help of many others. And this is the Comic Club presents The Hall Monitors. Now, this is the Crimson Cowl Comic Club. We're not talking about that. That's not the comic club that presented this book. It instead is a very different comic book club in which I'll throw it over to David to talk about what comic book club are we talking about here?
Well, if the Crimson Cowl Comic Club is the Justice League, then this comic club is like the Teen Titans.
There we go.
Um, it's a high school comic club. For the last over a year now, I've worked for the high school in West Bend, and I started a comic book club at the high school that I serve as the advisor on. One of the projects that we did was to create a comic book, which through some trial and error and a lot of conversations and hard work, this is what we ended up with. Um, and Ara can talk about part of that process. But yeah, it's a book that we did as a club for the high school. Um, Initially, it was going to be we kind of discussed what it was going to be. We settled on kind of an anthology style where it was going to have a few different stories in it. Through a few different things that happened along the way, what we ended up with was just one story, and that became the hall monitors.
Yes, and for a little setup for that, on the back of the book, it says, in the distant future, West Bend's East and West high schools have been relocated to a space station, and when the school is in danger, the last line of defense is the hall monitors. So yes, that is the setup for that. So how do you go about having the school club and deciding, how did you land on this story, David? If you want to start and how Aro got thrown into that.
Um, Yeah, well, as a group, we kind of decided on a few things. One was to have a theme. We went with a high school theme, and that had a lot to do with suggestions from people in the school, staff, students that were gave some input when they found out that we were doing a comic book. And I think that it was kind of expected that it would have something to do with the high school. So each story involved was going to have something to do with high school, whether it was actually some fictionalized version of the actual high school or just some high school in general. What was used for this story was a future version of the actual high school, where it's now exists as a space station uh, somewhere in the distant future, I think, or it might be the near future. I'm not sure. They're doing some changes in construction. Maybe the plans will change and they'll launch it into space. But yeah, so we split up into some creative groups, and even after doing those groups, there was still some participation from the whole club. Um, as ideas got bounced around and some suggestions were made. Um, and Ara was kind of matched up with Braden, who was the writer on this particular story. And this is what they came up with. Braden wrote it. Ara had made a few changes, that they agreed on as they kind of went. So she had a hand in um, what became the final story. Um, I think really it was up to them as far as what the actual story was and what they did. I mean, it could have been sci-fi, it could have been horror, it could have been a superhero thing. But this is kind of what they settled on between them. Like I said, a lot of the ideas were kind of discussed in class, and kind of bounced off some of the other students. But really, Braden and Ara had the most to do with this particular story. One of the other stories will happen. It just wasn't able to get done in time to be added to this book. And so that, as Anthony's got in there, was the other story that we called Crisis in the Cafeteria. A little fun fact on the titles. Um, there was a lot of discussion on what we were going to call these things between the comic itself and the story title. So there were some ideas floated around. One that was heavily pushed was something like Tales from the Janitor's Closet or something like that, which didn't really fit in the end because it really had nothing to do with that. And we kind of felt like we would need some grave sweeper type horror host or something like that if we were doing Tales from the Janitor's Closet. And so we didn't do that. At some point, we got down. One of the club members stepped down. She kind of figured out that this wasn't right for her, and she couldn't really get her ideas put together and whatever. So she stepped down, and that got us from 3 stories down to 2. And so we were going to call it just Double Feature. Was just going to be the name of the comic. Um, then, of course, when we had the deadline, came and went and got extended, and the other creative team just wasn't able to get it quite finished in time. And they had to cut a lot of things that they wanted to put in just to try and get it done. We had to make the decision that it would not get added to our first comic, that we will just have that as part of next year's. And that was Crisis in the Cafeteria. Both of those story titles, The Hall Monitors and Crisis in the Cafeteria, was probably my biggest contribution to the stories, just because we needed something. I wanted something that fit the high school theme. There's nothing in the story that actually says that these characters are actual hall monitors. It just kind of worked
Yeah.
between them looking at a monitor, and just fitting that kind of theme. So that was it. Just kind of guiding the group, telling them mostly what they couldn't put into it, because it is a high school project. There was a lot of conversations, I think, throughout the school year, what we could or couldn't put in a book. I actually had to talk to some people higher up in the school system than myself, just to make sure that we followed any guidelines that there might have been.
Yeah.
But this is the first comic book that's been created, so there weren't like real solid guidelines for us to go by. It was the first comic book club, so all we had for any guidelines whatsoever was anything that existed for other co-curriculars with the school district. Everything else we had to kind of just figure out as we went.
Very cool. Yeah. And you get to kind of set the tone and kind of set your own guidelines in a way too. So let's jump over to Ara. When we talk about your Chronicles of Bark book, we'll talk about that later, and we'll kind of get into Ara's origin story with being a creator and just loving comic books and stuff like that. But let's concentrate and just jump into the present right now with the hall monitor. So, how did you approach this project with working with Braden, and knowing that you had a certain page count and the kind of story and whatever tweaks? If you can kind of talk about your experience of getting to work with a group of people to create a comic book.
Yeah, so a lot of times when I do a lot of work, I'm very independent. Like the Chronicles of Bark one I did like entirely by myself, like writing, art, and all that stuff. But for this it was different because Braden was writing it, obviously. So it was just waiting on him to finish that. But the way he wrote it like a movie script, and it wasn't bad, it was good, but the page count kept getting higher and higher. And one, it was a lot of work to fill that page count, and two, we had a page limit. So I helped narrow it down a bit so it would work better for the page count that we needed. But I think it's fun to play around with page layout that way anyway, too. So that
Yeah,
was fun.
I think that's probably a common theme for people kind of jumping in and writing scripts. If you're used to telling stories, but then on different mediums, and then you have to make into a comic book, you'll write something like you said. If it felt like a movie script, but yeah, then the artist kind of comes in and be like, all right, well, I can't draw an entire movie into a 10-page comic. So it's always interesting to kind of see the artist putting that input in transforming the words into the story that we see. Now, when it comes to designing the actual characters, real quick, Ara, was that 100% up to you, or was there some consulting with the club as far as like, all right, this is what the people look like, this is what our monsters are going to look like, the aliens. What kind of process was that with the actual designs of the characters?
I think it was a little bit back and forth because I had played around with the monster design because I mostly like drawing the monsters. Like, people are fun and all, but there's something about drawing like creatures that's just more enjoyable to me. But um yeah, it was kind of because Brayden was wanting to make it more of like an alien inspired type thing, and that's something he had communicated with the designs of like the suits on the characters, and I'd taken that into consideration, but even like towards the end, if you look at the back of the book, there's a little bit of concept art that we threw in there. And I kind of went away from that because it looked a lot like it was from Alien. So in the final book, I changed it up. He looks a little more different in the final, but yeah, I think it was just overall better to try and take inspiration, but also do my own thing at that point.
David,
But
you
yeah,
add something?
Yeah, I was going to add in as we were talking about page count, that it was there was a little added difficulty to that because things changed as we, cut one story and whatever. Then the page count actually changed. When we started off, we were still having some discussions on how long this book was going to be. So they were starting off with it not having a real set in stone page count as they were kind of getting going with the ideas. And then we determined what the page count would be. When the first person dropped out, that removed one story from it. So that changed the page count then and added on. There was some very humorous discussion on what that page count consisted of. Um, so I won't name names, but there was somebody, and everybody in the club will know exactly who this is, with what a page consisted of. That was discussed way more than it ever should have been. But I think it added to the confusion of the page count for the book and how much they should do. And in the end, they actually were short on what it actually could have been because we'd also discussed having some extra content in the book, which never really got decided on. And so it created this problem of they actually could have had more pages but didn't. And I think that also created some issues with the story that didn't make it into the book. So uh, there was just a lot of moving parts in this whole project, and it was really difficult for everybody to keep track of what was going on in the page count and everything. It's definitely a learning experience for all of us because even for myself, having worked on projects with somebody, it's not this whole group that you're working with. I'm used to working with one person. Some people work one or two people. But in this case, we've got half a dozen people working together and trying to share the information and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And so it did it did create some problems throughout the whole process to where we got to the end and everybody goes, oh, it was going to be this many pages. I only accounted for this many or whatever it was. So there was a little bit of scrambling towards the end as well.
We'll get into it with Ara's segment when we talk about her book next. But if anyone else from this comic club, not the high school comic club, but the Crimson Comic Club, if there's any questions for David or Ara regarding this book, feel free to jump in. I know Jim mentioned something earlier. Do you want to kick us off?
I do have a comment about this book. I really like the creature, and I really like the way that you were able to take this unusual anatomy, and when you're showing motion, the motion fits the anatomy properly, it seems. Not like sometimes you get these weird creatures that are just moving, but it doesn't make sense. This motion seems to make sense for this strange looking creature. And I really appreciate that you did that. I also wondered, are these characters based on anybody else in the club? Or are they just completely made up out of your imagination?
Well, thank you for the compliments on the design, but for the people in the book, I didn't write it, but based on the names, I did recognize one of them because the person who wrote the book, Brayden, I've been in theater performances with him, and one of his friends through theater coincidentally had the same name as one of the guys in the book. So, yeah. The other two I
Okay,
don't think, but yeah.
Cool, cool.
nice.
If anybody else, feel free to jump in if you had anything. Otherwise, we can. Kirby?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
Oh, I was going to say, so it looks like, well, first of all, I wanted to compliment you. I really enjoyed this book. Awesome job. Um, it focuses mostly on what's happening to the students at West. I wanted to know, is there a follow-up story for what's going on at East during this book?
So technically, West and East are the same school. I
Okay,
think
sure.
it's kind of a weird school, I think that way.
Yeah.
But I think it's just called the West Bend High School. So it
Hmm.
was the building that was in space was based on the actual building. So if you go to the Silver Lining Center, that's kind of towards the back. The
Hmm.
big West Bend is on the top. So it might look like it's
Okay,
like only half of the school, but it's
Hmm.
kind of both.
I
So
gotcha. Awesome.
yeah, I know it's a little confusing. I think
Oh, no problem.
definitely weird.
Plus, with West already in the name at the beginning, too. But yeah.
Well, it's kind of
Ah,
like
true,
the
true.
con. We went to the con and we went to the West stores. And we had to
Mm,
go back and go around the school to the East stores.
yeah.
Yeah, we knew
Yeah.
that that was going to be a problem because a lot of events that happen there, people go to what we call the West Main entrance, and this was completely opposite end of the building for the Comic Con that the club held on May 17th. So we tried to address that and put some little signs up on some of those other entrances and everything, but it is confusing. A lot of people ask us. I've had people come to other events and they kind of go, "Why is this two schools?" Um, and there's always a lot of talk about just joining them. They've recently passed a referendum to make some changes to a number of the schools in the district, the high school being one of them. And so with these changes, they're kind of bringing that up again, is should we combine the schools and just have one school because it's essentially one school anyways. But I think a lot of the problems come in with, you got two different uh, sports teams for everything. You got, East football and West football and East soccer and so on. So they would have to change all that. A lot of people would be upset by that because then it limits how many people can actually be on the team where they're used to having two teams. Now they'd have to only have half as many potential athletes on the teams. So it does create some issues, and a lot of people agree that, yeah, it doesn't really make sense that it's two schools at this point. But for a lot of the marketing and the sports and those things, it's really difficult to now merge the two.
Kirby, if you had anything.
Yeah, I want to compliment this one. It was very well done. It's got that Teen Titan feel that X-Men school feel where the kids all, of course, have their little arguments to start out and get into the story and stuff. Great group of characters in there. I like the big catastrophe in space and how they fix things and stuff like that. It's a very well done book. But one thing I was curious about because I didn't notice it until I got home. I'm assuming this isn't for Minnesota, but it says min $5. Is that supposed to be minimum $5 for the cost on it?
That's exactly what that is. What we were asking at the table was essentially we were asking not that it's a $5 cover price per se, but we were asking for a minimum $5 donation to receive the copy of that
Yeah.
book.
I
It
wish I would
did
have noticed
definitely
it.
open up. Some people donated more than the $5 to get it. But it essentially was a fundraiser. So while it is a shorter book, and because of that, you kind of feel like, is $5 too much? But again, it's a fundraiser. We're trying to raise money for this club
Right.
so that we can go on and do bigger and better things next year and the following year, and that it'll grow. So that's essentially what it is. Is this is a fundraiser book? It's like buying a candy bar. That the kid says, "Hey, I'm selling candy bars for my school sport or whatever," and you're spending $5 on a $1 candy bar. You got to look at it like it's a fundraiser. You're trying to help out a club. It's going to a good cause.
Yep. And I love you're right up in the beginning, and that as I'm reading it, and then you're explaining the three stories, then the two stories, then the one stories. I had that in my brain. It's like, how many pages did they originally have planned, and then how many did they end up adding on to make it a one story book? Because I'm assuming that they had less pages planned when there was going to be three stories.
Yeah, initially it was going to be 28 pages of story.
Okay. So that's still, yeah, because they're 12. Yeah. Right.
So yeah, if there's any lingering questions about this book in general, move into our last little portion of this before we move on to the next one. I don't know if anybody had anything else to add. All right, so what we're gonna do here, the last thing you had mentioned, the West Bend High School's Comic Con, we've promoted it here on the show. David, it's a convention that you had set up, and with the help of the Comic Club, and basically giving our area a Comic Con that we have not seen in quite some time, especially in this area. So briefly, can you kind of talk about how that went and the excitement and the build up and now that it's over, just in general, what was it like putting on your very own Comic Con?
Well, it's very relieving now that it's over. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of planning. It had not been done before, definitely not with the school. So just like doing the club and the book, it hadn't existed before. So there were a lot of, can we do this? How do we do it? Um, and so a lot of time and planning and everything went into it. I would say that it turned out actually well. We had a number of vendors, which was great because that was my first concern is, are we going to be able to attract vendors? We had a good number of vendors. And one of the ways that I've judged the success of it was that I will say, not necessarily all, but most of the vendors that we had there were very happy. Early on, they were already telling me, they made their money back. They were making money over and above that. They were happy. They were really happy with the way that I handled them and the space that I gave them and everything else. But I've been a vendor at different conventions before, so I kind of knew what they would be looking for going into it. So I tried to be very accommodating and keep our table fees low and everything else. So that part was very successful, and we were able to get word out of this, and went out in school newsletters and things like that. But I think there's things that we can do differently in the future for like next year and whatever that we can expand upon that because our attendance was low, and that was kind of the disappointing thing. But it also wasn't a surprise. I expected it for our first year. Um, but fortunately, again, towards the vendors, the people that came in, obviously they came in and they were spending money, they were buying things, and they were leaving happy. So attendees were happy, vendors were happy. We made money as a club. I know we had the Crimson Cowl Media table there. We made money there. It was at least as much as we make at other conventions that we go to. Um, Anthony, I think you did well.
I was very
Um,
happy with the outcome. Yep.
so um, so seeing people that were there seemed to be pretty happy with it. Vendors were saying, "Yeah, I'd love to come back and do this again." So that's kind of what I'm judging it by. As far as the low attendance, it wasn't like it was just dead and nobody showed up. It was what I would call slow and steady. It seemed like every once in a while you'd have a little bit of a gap where people weren't coming in, but for the most part, people were trickling in throughout the entire day, right up until the end. At some point, I was going to close the doors early, figuring, oh, nobody's going to really come for that last hour, but people did. They were still trickling in at the very end. So I think it worked out really well that way. I've taken a lot of uh, suggestions, I guess, from attendees, from vendors, from parents of club members, from the club members, um, all as far as like what we could have done differently this time and maybe to think about for doing differently next year to make it even more successful.
Cool, cool. So yeah, if people wanted to get a copy of this, they can reach out to wherever you're hearing this podcast. There's all the information that's in the show notes on the audio version. You have all the information in the show notes on the YouTube version. So if you would like to support the comic club at the high school there and would like a copy for yourself, just reach out to us and we'll get that information over to David and get that figured out for you. So they all issued their compliments about the book. So it's my turn. I was glad they didn't steal my specific compliment because the one thing I kept thinking of is like if I was in high school and found out that there was a comic book club, that would have been the best part of my high school experience. I had a lot of fun with other different groups and friends and things like that. I was never part of any clubs or sports or anything like that. But man, if there was a comic book club, that would have been the greatest thing. Not only just to have that as a club, but to have one of the tasks be to make a comic book as well as putting on a comic convention. So I applaud David and Ara and everybody at the comic club and at the high school for putting that on because such an awesome thing that exists. So
Thank you.
yes, yes. So that will wrap it up for just this little chapter here. But our first portion jumps into our next portion pretty nicely because Ara, we are talking about the Chronicles of Bark. This is a comic that you did back in actually won the an award for 2023's the Mark Grunwald Award in the Eternals category. And for people that don't know, the late great Mark Grunwald was an Oshkosh, Wisconsin native, and he's known for his written work on Marvel Comics and especially for Captain America. So, can you talk about how you basically found out about this challenge and if you were up for the challenge to create your very own comic book in probably a short amount of time, I believe? So, can you talk about the creation of the Chronicles of Bark?
Yeah, so how I found out about it was through the in-person store. So I think the actual competition goes a couple months, but I didn't find out about it until like a month before the thing was due. So I was just going in to buy comics and I go in and they had this whole packet that was like, "Oh, make your own comic." And I was like, "Oh boy, an excuse to do something." So, yeah, so that's where that started, but I think it was fun because it's always something I've really wanted to do, and it was really an excuse to get myself going on it, I think. So, but it was fun. I've always enjoyed drawing dogs, so that was my thing, but they're based on my dogs, actually. I have a copy of the book, so that's good, but
There it is. And if
Um,
you are watching us on the YouTube version, or if you're listening to us in the audio version, jump over to YouTube and hit subscribe and check out the video version to see some of the art examples. Now, they're based on your dogs, so can you give us a quick elevator pitch on what is the Chronicles of Bark?
yeah, so it's a story revolving around two dogs. They are siblings and they're treasure hunters of sorts. So they go around and they look for magical artifacts and sometimes they get into some trouble. So in this issue, they kind of do that. And yeah.
And one thing that I really found like unique, like it's a very impressive book. I love the colors, just love the work with the characters and the humor. Very funny. There's a lot of laugh out loud moments in here. But the one thing that like after reading so many comic books, one thing that really stuck out to me was playing with the word balloons and the dialogue in a specific scene. I won't go into too many details, but on the video version, I'll show one little portion of having, jumping into the word balloons and just the way that's kind of orchestrated through that scene is just like it continues on for a couple pages and it's just a real interesting way of telling your story there. So when getting to develop something like this, is this your first like full on, especially with your printed comic book, but where does Arrah's creative journey begin? Have you been making comics throughout your life? I assume for fun and stuff like that. Can you kind of talk about where you started as a creator?
Well, I didn't really make a lot of like comics. The biggest thing I think I would say would be like little, like Calvin and Hobbes, Snoopy type bits, and that was with my old dog. There was a different dog that's the ones that are featured in this comic, but I used to make those, and from there it just kind of went. But I always used to read through the library because my local library has a lot of comics, even for young ages, for adults, for everyone, and it's only getting bigger. And I think it only feeds into my comic interest. But yeah, I think it's just fun. I especially love playing around with color. I think that's always fun to do.
And kind of what you talked about with the comic club book of you're working with a group of people, but now as we find out in the beginning of this book, this is written by Arrah, this is art by Arrah, we've got colors by Arrah, letters by Arrah, and cover art
Yep.
by Arrah. So can you kind of talk about the freedom of just the challenge of kind of pushing yourself, knowing that you had a deadline to kind of finish a challenge? How quick was it to come up with a story? And you made a comic book 100% by yourself in a very short amount of time. So can you kind of talk about that little push and drive you needed to get this out there in the world?
Yeah, so the story was already kind of there because even before I got into like making full comics, I'd always been into like writing. I used to write with my mom a bunch too when I was younger, but so I kind of already knew what I wanted to make it about, but from there it was kind of just drawing it out and doing that. I think the main part that took the longest was sketching everything because as much as playing around with layout is fun, I like to think about it and make sure that everything flows and so you're not getting confused with the word bubbles and what direction you're supposed to be going for that. And I think clarity is very important.
Cool.
But yeah.
We're gonna open it up to the rest of the club if there's any questions. I'll put Kirby on the spot because he always has a go-to question. It's always awesome to hear the answers to for the creators. I'm assuming you know what question I'm referring to. If you want to kick us off.
Yeah, sure. Uh, I'd love to know if you what you had published in your life that was your first item, whether it was a story you wrote to a comic book, or if you sent a piece of artwork in, or if you got put on in a newspaper for some type of artistic thing you did, or something like that. Was there something that started it all off for you?
I don't think there's anything in particular like that way, but I used to do a lot of like acrylic painting, like even just like on canvas. So I used to do paintings of dogs. I know that's surprising, but for one of our local dog rescues, and it was more of a fundraiser so they could raise money and make that. I haven't done that in a while, but that was always fun when I was doing it.
Cool, cool.
And I gotta know, did your dog wear a cape?
They aren't much for capes. I have put them in tutus.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Poor Blue.
Yeah, I don't know if they like it, but
But again, another wonderful story with great characters, and I love, like Anthony pointed out, the way they traverse through portals and or whatever they could be. But
yeah.
yeah, love the
I
way
think
that.
it's fun to play around with the scape of the comic because you don't always get to do it. And I guess if the dogs are magic, may as
Yep,
well.
take advantage of it.
Mhm.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I do. So, I love the color work in this book. I think that stood out to me a lot. And then there's just one panel that I really like where the two dogs fall into the hole, and one says, "We're in a hole," and the other one says, "Yeah, I know." And then he says, "I don't want to be in a hole." That's like the most sibling thing ever, and it just cracked me up. I loved it. But I see so much creativity in this book and a lot of great ideas. And you could probably write a whole bunch of stories about these dogs going on goofy treasure hunting adventures. So awesome job. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. And the sibling
Of
thing was
course.
actually one of my goals with making it because I've always liked like
Yep.
Super Sons, that comic.
Hmm.
I love the sibling dynamic between Superboy and Robin. And I
Sure.
kind of wanted to implement that to some extent because
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think you were successful.
looking back at the characters, I'm almost getting the color tones of the Batman 66 and Robin there, just with they
Oh,
almost look like they're
yeah.
wearing costumes in a way as far as beyond the cape. So yeah, cool. Anyone else have David?
Yeah, I actually also wanted to comment on the colors because this is something that I saw not just in both of these books,
Hmm.
um, but I also had the pleasure of seeing some of Ara's other artwork at the high school. They did an AP
Yeah.
art show recently, and she had a booth there with a lot of her art. And the one thing that I noticed across all of it, and I'd already seen it in the comics, but then I got to really see it in her other art, is her use of color. She makes great use of color to the point where even black and white and grayscale looks colorful. Just her lighting techniques and everything. She does a really great job. That was one of my disappointments with this book was that I feel like in the printed version, the colors weren't as vibrant as I would have liked them to turn out because I saw the digital and I get you're going to lose that. Looking at something on a computer monitor is going to look brighter than looking at it on paper. Um, but I wish some of that would have carried over a little bit more, and I think it still looks great. So don't get me wrong there. Um, but seeing the color that she used in both of these books, seeing the color that she used in her other art across the board, I was just amazed by just how awesome all that looks. Um, like I said, even her black and white and grayscale stuff. I mean, it looks colorful. So she does just an amazing job on that.
It's like you're going right into the footsteps of two of the greatest artists that are out there right
Hmm.
now, and it's Jenny Friesen and Mark Spears. They just have that
Yeah.
tendency to make the characters pop like you do, just that highlight to them. It just pulls them off the
Hmm.
page, and I love that.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, any questions, Jim?
I just want to say I particularly love the dark scenes where it was like
Yeah.
it has the effect of those old wax tables or tablets when you
Hmm.
scratch feel the colors underneath. And I think this is really clever, really nice the way it came out. Also, the character of Rocco, Reiko.
Yeah.
Uh, Reiko. I like the hooked lantern thing that he's carrying or she's carrying, and I am going to steal that, and I'm going to use that as an animal companion in D&D, who is going to have an animal, dog, whatever, that has a lantern strapped to it like that. That is going to be awesome. And then that's the feel I got from this whole book was this was a D&D campaign or a D&D adventure going through the tunnels and the portals and everything. Yeah, I just loved that. So good job, and I really loved the end. Your letters page was so clever.
Yeah, that was the work of my dad actually, because he used to do these Christmas cards. We used to do Christmas letters for the family, and at the back end of those, he would always put this little letters page based on the dogs. So like you'd have the update on all the kids in the family, and then in the back end you'd have the update by the dogs, and it's just them kind of making fun of each other. And I always thought those were funny, so I asked him to write one for the back of this, and I think that that worked out.
That was a nice inclusion, though. Very good.
Yeah, I liked it too.
Very much. And as the moderator here, I see that Ara's lawyers are wanting to join the Zoom to talk to Jim about the earlier comments. So we'll bring them into the Zoom after this segment. But no. Any other things anybody wanted to say about Chronicles of Bark before we move on to the last? Good, good. So, if people wanted a copy of this as well, same situation. Just reach out to us here at Crimson Cowl Media. Comment on the video, send the email, and the information, whatever's in the links in the show notes, wherever you see these messages, whether it be on Facebook or Instagram, and we'll get that taken care of for you. So that is Chronicles of Bark, an award-winning book. Congratulations, Ara. This is a very awesome book. So I'm glad that you went ahead and printed it. So. There we go.
Thank you.
All right. Now, our last little segment, part of this creator interview, is going to focus on Mr. Gloyd. We have a question here. We are talking about the Gravesweeper's spooky stories, specifically the Three Brothers Grimm. Now, I forget the lineup for if we talked about it on the Crimson Cowl Comic Club proper in full discussion, but we talked to you on Cartoonist by Night. So if people want to learn more about David, much how they learned about Ara here with kind of creative backgrounds and their journeys and everything, check out David's episode talking about Superman, as well as David Gloyd, aka Mr. Gloyd, over at Cartoonist by Night. So can you just dive into talking about this comic, how it turned from a short film to a web comic to now a printed comic? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, for the latter change, web to print, I always wanted to do it in print, but I wasn't sure if I was going to. I put it out there, and for a number of months, it was actually put up in two parts as a free webcomic on our website. And so now it's taken down but available in print, and I love the way that this one turned out for print. And put together as just one thing, not the two parts, so it's as it was originally intended. This actually started out though as two different film projects. The first being the character of Gravesweeper, who started off as just a kind of a side character in the short silent films that I made that Anthony was a part of. Jim played a part in one of those, and but one of the many characters that Anthony played was this character who at some point we started calling Gravesweeper. And I thought in doing this, because I'm doing comic book versions of those characters, from the Insignificant Adventures of Doc Oscar. But before even putting that out, I've already taken one of the side characters and spun off into his own book, making him a horror host for these other stories. So that's the Gravesweeper role in here. This particular story actually started off as a film project between me and my two sons uh, back when they were much younger, and my wife and I homeschooled them during that time. And as part of their school, we decided to do kind of a project. We did a film, and it was the Three Brothers Grimm. We'd created these kind of puppets out of styrofoam and cloth, and we did this black and white fun little film about three kind of Grim Reaper type characters who really wanted to get back to their old lives. They didn't enjoy doing this anymore, and they wanted to get back to their lives, so they go on this journey to do that. And I thought that would have made a great story for one of these grave sweeper stories because I want them to be accessible to a wide audience, being a most ages comic, as I like to call them. So kids can enjoy this, even though it's kind of this horror kind of genre. It's nothing that's too horrible that, a young child can't pick this up and read it because they're going to have nightmares. Although that's where the most ages come in because parents should always, be able to look at things and say, hey, this is appropriate for my child, or this isn't appropriate for my child. It should always be up to parents' discretion. Um, so I do credit my sons with this. I do credit Anthony with this because they all played a part in creating these characters and putting the story together. And I was a little concerned about transitioning this black and white film into a colorful comic book form. And I'm happy to say that I think that I was successfully able to do that. I was actually able to give some of these characters more personality in their appearances in doing the book than they had in the original film. They had their personality in the film comes through the voices, where myself, um, my oldest son, David, who many of you might know from the club from the early days, and other projects that I've worked on, and my other son, Ethan, and they all voiced some of these characters as well as added to the stories and the mannerisms and everything of these characters. So I really tried to capture all of that in this story, and I think it adapted to comic book form very well.
And you had written and drawn this issue with additional art by Mr. Gloyd II. So yes, your oldest
Uh,
son contributed
yeah,
some.
there are 3 pages that are in here. It's kind of this flashback scenes to to all three of these brothers from when they were alive. And so I wanted a slightly different feel to that. And so I went to David and I asked him if he would want to do 3 pages of this comic book. And he did those. I think those turned out great. I think it really accomplished what I wanted to do with those. I didn't really have anything good in the original film version for those. There were these very I don't know, simple drawings that were shown in the film version that represented them in their previous lives, and just what we got here from David with his art was great, including one of the characters has a family that we included a little drawing of them in there, and again, I think it just uh, turned out great. I sound like I'm really, patting myself on the back. But
Oh,
I guess I'm just saying that I was really happy that I was able to accomplish adapting it into this very colorful comic book from a black and white short little film.
yeah, and your son's art blends into your art pretty nicely. Like it's not like you can tell that all right, yeah, we are getting the flashback stories and stuff, but it's not so jarring of just like whoa, somebody. I think it complements both of your styles pretty well, of kind of fitting the tone, and it's a nice little transition into it and out of it again. Um,
Um, and it might help a little bit that I did the coloring
oh,
for
there you go.
both, even though there is a different palette between
Yeah.
between the two. So that's good that you thought that. Just hopefully it doesn't transition too much because I do want to make sure that people are aware that I did have another artist that worked on at least 3 pages of this book, and credit where credit is due.
Anybody else have any questions about this book at all? Feel free to jump on in.
Yeah, less of a question, but I really enjoyed the splash pages where we introduced, um, what the three brothers did in their living lives on Earth. And just overall, I really enjoyed this book, and I kind of liked the twist ending that they tried to get out of working for Death, but Death's like, haha, actually, you just played completely into my plan. But really, really good. I'm so glad to actually see this in print. I know that you've worked really hard on that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I was going to say that in my head canon, these brothers, their original life, they were part of Tales from the North.
Um, I have actually thought of that. I've had a discussion, a brief discussion one other time with David about potentially doing something there and having like a Tales from the North kind of spin-off thing where you actually get to see them in their adventures and maybe do the story of um, what led to their deaths to begin with, which I think would be a great story, and Tales from the North would be a great place to do it. So we'll keep that in mind, and I will pass that on. You know that hey, other people think it too. It's not just me.
Yeah, Mr. Gloyd, you did an awesome job with the Grave Sweepers intro and outro. I like the character. I like the way you did it. Definitely has that Grave Digger, Crypt Keeper feel like all the intro characters that do the different spooky story mixes. I loved how they had.
Kirby froze up on my end. Is that the same for everyone else?
They
Yeah.
searched.
Oh, I think he's back.
Okay, you're back, Kirby. So go ahead.
I also like the way the characters had to go, went and searched for something that brought them back to their time when they were alive and stuff. And I really enjoyed that.
Cool, cool.
Thanks. Yeah, I thought it was good, and I think maybe in part is because of doing this as a student project initially is trying to have some kind of lessons in there. You know, it's like a lot of cartoons or something like that from especially like the 80s and whatever, where you always had that lesson learned, um, from it in the end. And I think you can kind of take that away from this. And I don't know, if it's a great lesson that people will go, oh wow, now I know. But but I think it was fun to have some sort of a lesson in there.
Cool, cool. Anybody else throwing anything? As Jim takes a swig there, I'll fill the time. I one thing I want to mention is that being a part of this comic book through being a horror host and having the grave sweeper, it's always been fun playing the character and coming up with something new every time we get to put on the beard and fill the pockets of the grave sweeper and figure out what's going to be munched on for that next short film as much as finding out in the comic book. So it's cool to just kind of have that role in a world. There used to be a time and a place where I'd just be paying all this money to be like, oh, I'll be drawn into this comic, I'll be drawn into that comic, and now I just have to exist, and now I'm being kind of thrown into things. So I appreciate it on that level as well. And then I had a friend of mine, so I'm going to extend this this comment over to Mr. Gloyd, is that my friend, as I was telling her about this, so she's like, oh, so you're basically like Elvira. And I'm like, yep. So I am Elvira for a new generation. So yeah, I like just having that kind of role. I didn't have any creative input on that, and it was super fun to kind of just dive in and read this story, having seen the films, both the Three Brothers Grimm, the original short film, and stuff like that. It was fun just to open up a comic book and not know, what was in store, because yeah, it was definitely a fun, chilling
Yeah.
read.
With that beard and everything, I'd have to say more Joe Bob Briggs than Elvira.
I don't know. I think Anthony, Mistress of the Dark.
Yeah, it's got a nice
And then we start going into another character that he played. But
I was gonna say, I believe he tested those waters.
Anybody else have any closing comments for David?
I do have one quick thing here. I noticed I didn't see it earlier, but was there an alternate cover I missed, or is that planned for a volume 2 or issue 2?
no, those two that you're looking at, those were the digital covers. Because even when I do web comics, I still like to create a cover for it. So those were the originals for part 1 and part 2 when it was the web version.
I see there's
However,
another.
if you look at the back and you'll see some of my upcoming work, there is an advertisement for Grave Sweeper Spooky Stories, The Witching Cat. And The Witching Cat, like the Three Brothers Grimm, was originally a school project that the boys also helped do early. And I can't remember which came first, but when I was able to do the Three Brothers Grimm, I thought, well, now I got to do The Witching Cat.
Cool.
Awesome. So yeah, if nobody else has anything to add, then we will move on. All right. So to recap everything that we've shown here, whether it be the West Bend High School's Comic Club, the Hall Monitors issue, whether it be Arrah's Chronicles of Bark, or Mr. Gloyd's Grave Sweeper Spooky Stories, the Three Brothers Grimm. All of these are available to purchase. Just reach out to us at Crimson Cowl Media and comment and reply and all that stuff, and we'll get that information over to David and Arrah and get you some comics. So it was awesome having both of you on, obviously having David return to the club and welcoming Arrah to the comic club is exciting to hear your stories, not only about your creative stories, but to literally read your stories in these comic books, to have them all, make their debut at the Comic Con that we all kind of helped out with and participated in, and yeah, so it was a fun experience to go there, not only to have the Comic Con and experience that and support that in the comic club, but to also be excited for new books that were dropping on with the release of that con. So congratulations to all of you. I know this episode started off with an issue 327 intro and saying we're going to do weekly reviews, but it was such a great discussion, such a great segment with our creators and talking about their books. We're going to split the episode, so we're going to end this episode proper of this creator interview. Just go to crimsoncowlcomicclub.com for info on original webcomics and all of that fun stuff. Subscribe to Crimson Cowl Comic Club on iTunes, Crimson Cowl Comic Club over on YouTube for the full version, the preferred experience. And yep, so let us know what you think. Check out these books, and thank you for being on the show. We'll see you later.
Thank you, Slimer.